Layla shuffled through the bustling streets of New Avalon, the city of reinvention. Everywhere she turned, glowing billboards displayed the faces of the rich and famous, their flawless skin, and perfect smiles promising a life she could never hope to achieve. The ads for face shift technologies were particularly hard to ignore. Be anyone. Live your best face. The slogan taunted her as she clutched her portfolio tightly, heading to yet another gallery, in the hopes of finding someone who believed in her work. Inside the gallery, her paintings hung in a dimly lit corner, overshadowed by more prominent displays. Her art was raw and emotional, a series of portraits capturing human vulnerability, but no one cared. Art in New Avalon wasn't judged by skill or depth. It was judged by the face behind the canvas. Influencers with perfect smiles and millions of followers dominated the gallery's prime spots, their shallow but visually stunning pieces stealing the spotlight. Layla tried to ignore the whispers around her as patrons glanced her way. Great technique, but she doesn't have the face for success, one man muttered to his companion. Layla's face burned with shame, and she excused herself, retreating to the corner of the room where no one would notice her. By the end of the night, her paintings were untouched, and she walked home feeling invisible. Back in her cramped apartment, she threw her portfolio on the floor and slumped onto the couch. She knew she was talented, but talent wasn't enough in a world obsessed with appearances. Her phone buzzed, and she opened it to see an ad for Face Shift, its sleek interface glowing in the dim room. For a hefty fee, she could rent the face of Naomi Quinn, the world's most beloved celebrity. Naomi's flawless features were known across the globe, her beauty both timeless and otherworldly. Layla hesitated. The idea felt wrong, inauthentic. But then she thought about the man's comment, the empty gallery, and her stagnant career. What if a better face was the key to unlocking her potential? What if she could finally be noticed? Before she could overthink it, she tapped the screen, authorizing the payment. The system confirmed her booking. Naomi Quinn's face will be available for 1 week. Enjoy your transformation. The process was seamless. Layla stepped into the Face Shift pod, a high-tech booth that scanned her features and overlaid Naomi's face onto hers, using advanced neural mapping and skin grafts. When the procedure was complete, she looked in the mirror and gasped. The person staring back at her was unrecognizable. Her cheekbones were higher, her skin flawless, her eyes sparkling with a confidence she'd never known. The next morning, Layla attended another gallery event, this time under her new identity. Heads turned as she walked in, her striking beauty commanding attention. People flocked to her paintings, praising her talent and showering her with compliments. For the first time, Layla felt seen, and it was intoxicating. But beneath the surface, a sense of unease lingered. The face in the mirror wasn't hers. It was borrowed, a mask that could slip at any moment. And as much as she loved the attention, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living someone else's life. That night, Layla's phone buzzed with a notification from Face Shift. Her stomach dropped as she read the message. Alert, original face unavailable. Please contact support for assistance. Panic set in as she realized the implications. Without her original face, she had no legal identity. She wasn't just borrowing someone else's face, she had lost her own. Layla stared at the notification on her screen, her heart racing. She tried to call Face Shift's customer service line, but it was an endless loop of automated responses. For general inquiries, press 1. For technical support, press 2. She pressed every option, but none led to a human operator. Her frustration mounted as she realized how helpless she was. Without her original face in the system, she had no way to verify her identity. Everything in New Avalon was tied to biometric data, from her bank accounts to her apartment access. Without her face, she was effectively invisible. The next morning, she attempted to go about her day as usual, but the cracks in her rented identity began to show. At a cafe, her payment was declined because the system didn't recognize her. When she tried to access her apartment, the door refused to unlock. Identity not recognized. The smart lock repeated in its monotone voice. Layla banged on the door in frustration, but no one answered. Her neighbors wouldn't recognize her as Naomi Quinn, and even if they did, they wouldn't believe her story. By evening, Layla found herself wandering the city, her anxiety growing with each passing hour. Her reflection in store windows seemed to mock her. Beautiful, Perfect. And utterly false. She tried to contact FaceShift again, but the automated responses were no help. We are unable to process your request at this time, the system replied each time she tried to escalate her issue. As night fell, she found herself in a seedy part of the city, following rumors she'd overheard about others who had lost their faces. A dark alley led her to an underground bar filled with outcasts and misfits. Most of them wore crude masks or hoods to hide their disfigured or stolen faces. Here, she met Caleb, a disheveled programmer who had been living off the grid since his face was stolen 6 months ago. They don't care about you, Caleb said bitterly when Layla explained her situation. FaceShift isn't just a cosmetic service. It's a front for something much bigger. They're stealing identities and selling them on the black market. Layla's stomach churned. But why? What do they gain from it? Power, Caleb replied. In this city, your face is your life. Without it, you're nothing. And they can use your identity to do whatever they want. Steal, commit crimes, even replace you entirely. Layla's fear turned to anger. She couldn't let this happen. She had to find her face and reclaim her identity. Caleb mentioned a group of underground hackers who had been investigating FaceShift for years. They might be able to help, he said, but they don't work for free. Be ready to pay up. Before Layla could ask more, she felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her. She turned and froze. In the shadows of the bar, a figure stepped forward, its movements eerily familiar. It took Layla a moment to realize why. The person was wearing her face. The figure stepped out of the shadows, and Layla's breath caught in her throat. It was her face, her real face, staring back at her. But the expression was cold, lifeless, and unnervingly detached. For a moment, she froze, unsure of whether to confront the imposter or run. Her instinct took over when the figure's hand darted to its side. Pulling out a sleek, metallic baton, Layla bolted. She pushed her way out of the underground bar and into the neon-lit streets of New Avalon. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she ducked into a side alley, trying to lose the figure in the maze of backstreets. Her rented face, Naomi Quinn's flawless features, was a double-edged sword. It drew too much attention, and she knew the imposter wouldn't let her escape easily. Eventually, she found herself crouched behind a row of dumpsters, gasping for air. The imposter hadn't followed her, but her mind raced with questions. Who was that person? Why did they have her face? And more importantly, how could she get it back? The next morning, she met Caleb at a hidden cafe frequented by those who lived on the fringes of society. He seemed unsurprised when she described the encounter. That wasn't just some random thief, he said, stirring his coffee absently. That was a plant. FaceShift uses people like them to enforce their control. If you get too close to the truth, they send your face after you. Layla shuddered. The idea of someone else using her face as a weapon was more horrifying than anything she could have imagined. What do I do? She asked. Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice. There's a hacker named Theo. He's been tracking FaceShift for years, and he knows more about their operation than anyone. But he's paranoid as hell and won't help unless he knows you're serious. How do I find him? Follow the black networks. Theo's signal pops up in encrypted forms. You'll need to prove yourself before he even talks to you. Layla spent the next few days navigating the city's digital underworld, using Caleb's guidance to track Theo. Finally, she found him in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of New Avalon. Theo was younger than she expected, with a sharp jawline and a cocky demeanor that didn't match the gravity of his work. You must be desperate if you came all the way here, he said, leaning back in his chair. Screens surrounded him, displaying lines of code and surveillance footage from FaceShift facilities. I need my face back, Layla said bluntly. And I want to expose FaceShift for what they're doing. Theo raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. But it's not just your face. FaceShift has hundreds, thousands of faces in their system. Yours is just one of many they've stolen to sell on the black market. What do you mean? Sell? Layla demanded. Theo spun one of his monitors toward her. It displayed a live feed of a secret FaceShift auction. Faces were being bid on by anonymous elites, their names hidden behind encrypted tags. This is what they're really doing, Theo explained. They're not just offering cosmetic changes. They're selling identities to the highest bidder. Politicians, criminals, corporate spies, they all want clean slates or new masks. Layla stared at the screen in horror. How do we stop them? Theo smirked. We don't stop them. We destroy them. He laid out a plan to infiltrate FaceShift's headquarters. The facility housed a massive server farm where all stolen faces were stored. If they could breach the server and upload a virus, it would erase the entire database and shut down the company's operations. But the plan was risky, and Layla would need to use Naomi Quinn's face to gain access. Layla stood outside FaceShift's gleaming headquarters, her heart pounding as she adjusted the hood of her jacket. Theo had outfitted her with a small device disguised as a bracelet, which would give him remote access to the building's systems. The plan was simple on paper: pose as Naomi Quinn, infiltrate the server room, and upload the virus, but Layla couldn't shake the feeling that things would go horribly wrong. She entered the building, her face instantly recognized by the biometric scanners as Naomi Quinn. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed, and security guards stepped aside without question. The power of Naomi's identity was intoxicating, but it also made Layla feel like a fraud. Every step she took felt like a betrayal of herself. As she reached the lower levels of the building, Theo's voice crackled through her earpiece. You're doing great. The server room is 3 doors down on your left. And Layla, stay cool. They're watching. Layla pushed open the heavy steel door to the server room and was immediately struck by the hum of machinery. Rows of servers stretched out before her, glowing faintly in the dim light. At the center of the room was a terminal with a biometric lock. It required her original face to access, but Theo had anticipated this. He had hacked the system to accept Naomi Quinn's face instead. She placed her hand on the scanner, holding her breath as the lock verified her identity. The terminal beeped, and the screen lit up. Theo's virus was ready for upload, and Layla's fingers hovered over the keyboard. But before she could complete the process, the door behind her slammed shut. Well, what do we have here? A voice drawled. Layla turned to see Naomi Quinn herself standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. The real Naomi was just as stunning as her rented face, but there was something cold and calculating about her presence. Using my face to sneak into my own building? Bold, Naomi said, her lips curling into a smirk. But did you really think I wouldn't notice? Layla backed away, her mind racing for an escape plan. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low and menacing. You're not the first to try this, but you might be the last. You see, I don't just own FaceShift. I am FaceShift. Everything about this operation runs through me, and you're nothing but a glitch in the system. Naomi signaled her guards, who lunged toward Layla. She dodged, grabbing a loose server cable and whipping it toward one of them. The room erupted into chaos as Layla fought to protect herself, while Theo shouted instructions through her earpiece. Hit the override button on the terminal, Theo yelled. It'll trigger an EMP and fry the system. Layla made a desperate dash for the terminal, slamming her hand on the override button. The room filled with a deafening hum as the servers began to overload. Naomi screamed in rage, and Layla barely escaped as the building's alarms blared. Layla returned to Theo's warehouse, her body bruised but her resolve unshaken. We're not done, she said, her voice steely. Naomi is still out there, and FaceShift is still operational. Theo nodded, already working on a new plan. We'll need to hit them where it hurts, their public image. If we can expose what they're doing to the world, they'll crumble. Over the next few weeks, Layla and Theo compiled evidence from FaceShift servers, leaking incriminating data to journalists and whistleblower sites. The public was horrified by the revelations: stolen identities, black market sales, and the manipulation of entire industries. Protests erupted, and FaceShift's stock plummeted. But Naomi Quinn wasn't one to go down without a fight. She released a statement denying the allegations, framing Layla as a disgruntled user, trying to sabotage the company. Layla knew she had to do more than expose the truth. She had to confront Naomi one last time. The final showdown took place in a hidden FaceShift facility on the outskirts of the city. Layla infiltrated the building with Theo's help, navigating a labyrinth of security measures. When she finally found Naomi, the two faced off in a tense confrontation. You think you've won? Naomi sneered. This technology is bigger than you, bigger than me. You can't stop progress. This isn't progress, Layla shot back. It's exploitation, and it ends now. The battle was fierce, but Layla ultimately prevailed, uploading a final virus that wiped FaceShift's servers and exposed Naomi's personal involvement in the conspiracy. Naomi fled, her empire in ruins, but Layla knew she wasn't gone for good. In the aftermath, Layla reclaimed her face, but the experience left her changed. The scars from her journey were visible, but they became a part of her identity, a testament to her resilience. She returned to her art, channeling her pain and triumph into a new series that captured the complexities of identity and self-worth. Her work gained recognition, not because of her appearance, but because of its raw, emotional honesty. For the first time in her life, Layla felt truly seen. As she stood in front of a mirror, studying her reflection, she smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that was enough. Months had passed since FaceShift's empire had crumbled, but the scars of its influence lingered across New Avalon. Layla had watched from the sidelines as protests erupted and lawsuits piled up against the company. Survivors of the identity theft came forward in droves, sharing harrowing stories of lost faces and stolen lives. For many, there was no resolution. Their original identities were gone, erased forever. Layla, however, had reclaimed hers. She touched the edges of her reflection in the mirror, tracing the faint scars that remained after the face recovery procedure. They were a stark reminder of her journey, not just of what she'd endured, but of who she had become. Her reflection was no longer perfect, but it was real. For the first time in her life, she valued that more than anything. Her new art exhibit, The Mask in the Mirror, opened to a packed gallery. Each painting depicted faces in various stages of distortion and reconstruction, capturing the raw emotion of identity lost and reclaimed. Critics called her work groundbreaking, a visceral commentary on humanity's obsession with perfection. But for Layla, it wasn't about the accolades. It was about telling the story that so many like her couldn't. As the gallery buzzed with energy, a young woman approached Layla, her eyes wide with admiration. "Your work is incredible," she said. "I've never seen anything like it." Layla smiled warmly. "Thank you." "What drew you to it?" The woman hesitated, glancing around nervously before leaning in. I was a victim of FaceShift too. I thought I was alone until I saw your story. You gave me hope." Layla's chest tightened, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She placed a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said softly, "and you're stronger than you think." Later that night, as the gallery emptied, Layla sat by one of her paintings, lost in thought. The battle against FaceShift had taken so much from her, but it had also given her a purpose. She wasn't just an artist anymore. She was a voice for those who had been silenced. A faint chime from her phone broke her reverie. It was a message from Theo. "You should see this." Attached was a news article with the headline, "Naomi Quinn spotted in Europa District, new identity suspected." Layla's stomach churned. She had known Naomi wouldn't disappear for good, but seeing proof of her return reignited a flicker of fear. FaceShift was gone, but its technology was still out there, waiting to be exploited again. And Naomi Quinn was nothing if not resourceful. For a moment, Layla considered ignoring the message, retreating into the new life she had built for herself. But then she thought of the young woman at the gallery, and all the others who had suffered in silence. She couldn't turn her back on them, not now, not ever. She replied to Theo with a single word, "Where?" Layla stood and faced her reflection once more. The fight wasn't over, but this time, she was ready. Her face might have been stolen once, but her identity, her true self, was unshakable, and she would ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. With renewed determination, she grabbed her coat and headed out into the city. The night stretched before her, full of possibility and danger, but she no longer feared what was to come. She was Layla, and she was no one's mask. The world might have been obsessed with perfection, but Layla knew the truth. It was the flaws that made her unstoppable.